Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild one-shot dungeon crawl, The Dead Wizard's Tower, designed by Jordan Carmichael for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, Grayson, and Chris, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos David Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Rosh, and Lumpy Spuds. Thank you all very much for your support. The Dead Wizard's Tower is a Tier 1 one-shot. I was going to call it an adventure, but it's a one-shot, so it means it's designed for about 4 hours. It is a dungeon crawl for level 5, and I have a lot of issues with it. I like the premise, which is kind of basic, but could be interesting with a little digging. This tower, you just come across it, which if you're going to do a one-shot, I do appreciate ones that you can drop into a campaign easily. When I'm looking for extra material, just a side quest or something, it helps if you have something that can be, placed anywhere. It could be kind of setting agnostic or location agnostic and that kind of thing. And in this case, you just come across the tower, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's just magical in nature, so you can simply come across it. And you meet a wizard outside, and his friend has died. Friend being a loose term, really his rival. And the friend wants to acquire the wizard's spell book and staff, and basically all his research notes. And he's willing to pay the party a pretty penny to go in and get it. So that is the whole reason for the dungeon crawl. And of course, it's a decent payout, and the party can keep whatever they find. So what more excuse do you need to go into a wizard's tower? It is a dungeon crawl. However, it does not have a map at all. There's no map. There's very little art in general. You can see it's only 15 pages total on the PDF, which is really sucky for a dungeon crawl because those need maps more than any other kind of adventure in D&D. And it's extremely linear, which also sucks for a dungeon crawl because one of the things that dungeons do best is giving your players the freedom to explore and decide which paths they take and which rooms they go in and how they handle everything. In this one, it's just laid out as a series of floors. You go through each floor in a specific order until you reach the end. So you literally just experience this floor, then this floor, and then this floor. There's really no exploration. Even within the floors themselves, there's not much going on other than just fighting. So it's extremely combat heavy, and it's extremely linear, neither of which I'm typically looking for in a dungeon. Now, if the theme was kind of cool, that might help elevate things. And I think at first I thought it had an interesting theme, which was the wizard specialized in trying to create life. Not like necromantic life, not like raising the dead and doing all that, but trying to figure out how to create his own source of life with maybe an arcane spark or something to that effect. Which I thought, okay, maybe we're going to go into like, what's that movie with Oscar Isaac, and he's making a robot and like trying to do like the Turing test. Ex Machina. Something where it was like an AI tropey thing where it's like, maybe there's somebody in here in the dungeon that you don't know if they're, real or not, or that kind of thing. That would have been really cool, and that kind of thing would have gone a long way. But instead, what it boils down to is you find like one golem at the end who has been created and is just kind of wailing about his lost creator and all that. And it really boils down to probably going into a fight unless the players make some really good charisma checks. But there's already a lot of combat in here. In here. I'm still getting over a freaking cold, by the way. So I just didn't think that it explored the theme very well in terms of, other than just being a generic wizard tower, which it definitely does that. So the first floor is just a bunch of construct type things. So you got flying swords, rug of smothering. It's almost like somebody just went through the monster manuals, kind of checked all the things they could do. Mimic, animated armor on the first floor. The second floor has a really interesting idea with a trap with a oh shoot, what's that called? The sand timer. It's like a giant version of that, and it flips over, and then gargoyles attack. But I'm not sure I even understand how it's supposed to work because it says that the doors unlock when the sand drains, which should take 5 rounds, which means and if the players defeat the gargoyles, then more gargoyles just keep showing up. And if the players but if they leave the area, the gargoyles don't pursue. But if they just do nothing, then eventually after 5 rounds, the sand will dissipate and then the doors unlock. So I was very confused about what the players should be doing other than just surviving for 5 rounds. I like the idea of there being some kind of a sand timer puzzle here, maybe with enemies, but I feel like it could have been made a little bit more interesting. And at least as the DM, helped me understand how exactly this is supposed to work and what the players are supposed to do, make them more proactive for this encounter. The third floor is, excuse me. As you can tell, I do not edit my videos, which I probably should when I'm literally not feeling 100%. The third floor is an arboretum, which is, I thought it was, okay, we're hammering home the theme of exploring life, but in this case, it's just a bunch of those blight creatures, needle blights, twig blights, and it's another combat encounter, and this random quaddle shows up and just talks to the players, and as long as they are cool about everything, the quaddle just leaves. It's a very bizarre encounter right there. The fourth floor is the actual bedroom, so you've basically fought every single floor now. The fourth floor, you actually do a series of riddles, which is cool. I like to see riddles. And I also like to see that the riddles are decent, and they have to do with like objects in the room. It almost felt like an adventure game, which is kind of cool. Like you have to use various objects to solve the riddles. And it does mention that if you struggle with the riddles, just let them roll checks or whatever else, which is always important because if you have a specific main quest blocker and say you have to solve these riddles, assume that your players are not going to get it unless you kind of hit them over the head with it. I could go off on a whole rant about how you need to make puzzles err on the side of easiness unless you really know your players and know that they're extremely into this kind of thing. Always err on the side of easiness because that's just more fun in general. And then the final sanctum area, which is where you get the staff and the spellbook from. There's a specter hanging out, which you need to defeat the specter. You could tell him the wizard's dead, but it doesn't really matter. And then you find this clay golem who's imbued with life, which you could tell him the wizard's dead, and he just becomes despondent and then eventually attacks the players unless you roll some really good persuasion checks. And that's about it. You come outside, you turn in your stuff, and away you go. It does have some various endings that can occur depending on what you did, if you've got the clay golem with you, and if you don't. It doesn't really make a huge difference other than you can choose not to turn over the staff and the spell book to the wizard who hired you, in which case you basically get these items instead of the gold, assuming your players aren't just murder monsters and kill that wizard too and take everything. So, I do appreciate that even though it's very short, because a lot of adventures, they skimp on the epilogue. They go through this whole nice adventure, and at the end, they're just like, and then, you get this reward, and this person goes this way, and then if this happens, then this happens. It's just a couple sentences. I do appreciate that there's actual paragraphs dedicated to different ways that the story can end, even though it's a very, very short one-shot story. But ultimately, a complete lack of maps is a big problem for me. I mean, in general, you all know what I think about maps in general. But if you're going to do a specific dungeon crawl, you really need maps, frankly. I didn't get, the wizard tower thing, it really just comes off too much of a generic wizard tower rather than having any kind of a theme. What's odd is it even tries to do the magical, like, oh, the tower's bigger on the inside than on the outside, so it's like 200 feet, inside, whereas it's this very, regular 60-foot tower on the outside. But it doesn't do anything with that space. It's not like each floor is like this big dungeon that you can go and explore, and it's just usually one encounter. So what's the point of even having this big forest that's just this huge area when you have one little forest there? It might as well just be a normal sized tower. Now, I get that this is a one-shot, so, and that's the other problem I have is when it's a one-shot, granted, I'm okay with the tower being short, but I'm not okay with it being basically just a whole bunch of fights, and I would be, frankly, worried about having this many fights in a one-shot, because combat takes more time than anything else in D&D. if you're doing a one-shot, you will be lucky to have really probably 2 full combat encounters, and usually one of them is always gonna be your ending boss fight, if you're gonna have an ending boss fight. This one has, by my count, you've got the first floor, animated stuff, the second floor gargoyles, the third floor blights, and then the final battle. So you've got 4 fights. That's a lot for a one-shot, although that's basically all you're doing is fighting. So I can't say it's too highly recommended. I do like the layout. The organization is well done. It looks like it's got the classic, 5th edition look to it, the sepia tone parchment paper. The art that is used is nice, but I felt like there's a lot of empty space here, which is very bizarre. This should have been filled with art or something. It just looks very off to have all this blank space in here. Also, if I can give just a generic tip, do not, we're not supposed to judge things by our cover, but let's face it, covers absolutely will sell or not sell products. Do not make your cover page look the same as one of your inside pages, because that makes it look like you don't have a cover. I like this art on the cover, but you need to at least put this as a different, put it all black or something. Just put a black on the background and then put this on its same, just do whatever. Just change it to where it doesn't look like it's just literally another page in your product. That does not look good. Also, there are a lot of grammatical errors, which I had a problem with. And you all know, if you've watched some of my previous reviews, my general rule of thumb is if there are just 1 or 2, out of a whole thing, then I generally let that pass because we're all human. But if it's consistent and there are numerous errors and things that I was like, oh, that's not good, then I am going to call you out on it. And in this case, this really needed to have a once over. It's not nearly as bad as ones that I've found bad are, if that makes sense. But I did have a problem. First of all, the author does not seem to know the difference between its and its. ITS and IT apostrophe S. So without sounding too condescending, I will briefly explain to all of you. And, not everybody's a writer. I totally get that. But if you're going to publish something and have people buy it, it needs to be grammatically correct in the language that you are publishing it in. ITS is possessive. It means something belongs to someone else. It's sword. It's fault. It's coaster. Just looking around things now. It shows that belongs to something, really, and people aren't it, so that shouldn't come up too often. But a monster, it's stare, it's teeth. IT apostrophe S is a contraction short for it is. So you could say it's going over there, or it's coming up on Friday. It is a verb. So you cannot conflate its with its, and it is used numerous times throughout this page where I don't think the author understood the difference. Also, a grammatical error at the very title of the entire document, which is a huge red flag faux pas. The dead wizard's tower. The tower belongs to the dead wizard. Therefore, it should be an apostrophe S. Yes, that's a big deal, and I'm going to call you out on it. I'm going to call you out on it every time. It is the dead wizard's tower. It should be apostrophe S tower. The Dead Wizards is not like the name of a band, although that's actually kind of an awesome name for a band, the Dead Wizards. But even then, if it was the Dead Wizards and it was their tower, you would have the apostrophe after the S, so it would still be their tower in possessive. So things like this really irk me if you can't tell, and usually I don't go off on a grammar rant, but if you're in it, it's not horribly well written. Like, I understood everything, but there was just a few grammatical errors that really made my skin crawl, and that's why I'm going to call it out. And there's a few like run-on sentences and a few other things here and there. It's not, like I said, it's not as horrible as some of the bad ones I've seen. But another problem I have is because it's so short, it makes those few errors really stand out and be even more glaring because of the ratio. So that is a problem that I have. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Dead Wizards' Tower. That still bugs me. Pro, solid layout and organization. So as much as I have a problem with some of the grammar, I do not have a problem with the actual way it's laid out. It's got the very standard, and I don't want to knock for using that standard. It's a good standard. They've got the font, the way that the headings are used. Adventure summary at the beginning is really solid. It's got a foreword. All of that stuff is very well. The text boxes look good. It looks good. It's easy to read. Font's a little small, but I'm not even going to complain about that. Honestly, that's fine. And pro, epilogue that details multiple endings. I do really like that this has an actual epilogue section, because so many adventures that I've reviewed skip on the epilogue, or the epilogue itself is one paragraph, where I feel like if you're going to do any kind of adventure that has a beginning, middle, and end, then make sure to pay attention to your end and make sure it ends in a satisfying way. And although the epilogue doesn't really seem to matter a whole lot depending on the actions that you take, I appreciate that it goes, at least gives me those kind of details, which is nice to have. Cons, grammatical errors. I already went through it all. I'm not going to go over it again, but that is a more of a problem here than one or two. So it was a bit egregious. Cons, no map. That sucks. I need a map. I need a map. I mean, I would like maps for everything, frankly. And I know not everybody is an artist, but there are tools out there in the internet sphere for you to cobble a map together, especially if your entire product is a dungeon crawl. Then it really needs to have a map of that dungeon. Or, commission somebody to do something. Give me something. I need some kind of visual aid for a map. And then con, it's extremely combat heavy and it's extremely linear. It is basically just a hallway with a straight hallway, I guess vertical, with a series of combat encounters. That's pretty much all it is. The one riddle was nice, but it's just not enough to break it up and make it interesting. Final verdict, The Dead Wizard's Tower begins with a solid premise, but quickly devolves into a series of linear combat encounters. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.